So we're looking at Refugee Rights Day across Canada. So I know that there's other things going on. There was a group that went to Parliament today with the Canadian Council for Refugees and talked to MPs. And Amnesty International is also tweeting and holding some other campaigns, related campaigns. So we're really fortunate to be able to have Taslim and MOSAIC join us for this presentation. And basically, we're going to take a bit of a look at the classroom resources and linking intercultural awareness to the EAL classroom. So we're really pleased to be able to present this BC TEAL resource and hope everybody enjoys it. So thanks very much, Taslim, for coming in and presenting for us today. And I'm going to turn off my webcam in a minute, but I just wanted to say hi to everyone and welcome you.
Thanks, Brenda. I have the pleasure of introducing Taslim. Taslim has an MA from King's College London and 2 decades of international teaching, teacher training, and research experience. She is a certified intercultural practitioner. That sounds like a very interesting position. And is the manager of intercultural trainings through MOSAIC Works. She was the developer, and very well done, of the BC TEAL sponsored Refugee Rights Day lesson activities. And if anybody has missed out on those activities, you may find them on the BC TEAL website under initiatives or on our BC TEAL blog, blog.bcteal.com. We'll post the links for those. So wonderful resources, free resources there for you. So thank you very much, Taslim, for the resources for this afternoon. Earlier this afternoon you spoke, and now you're speaking again. So busy, so thank you so much for taking the time. I'm just going to ask one little quick poll question from everybody, if I can do it. And I'm just going to post a yes/no here, and I just want to ask if anybody has had a chance to try out the look at and maybe even use the material that Taslim created. So I'm just going to post a yes/no, and you'll see buttons appear at the bottom of your screen. And if you've had a chance, just post yes or no there. And it looks like so far we've had 3 no's, 2 yeses. So we've had a few people so far. So thank you. I'll close that poll. And it looks like we're almost even split there, Taslim. So now you'll know a little bit more information about who's had a chance to play with it as you take us through some of the information. So thank you again. I will disappear at this point and turn everything over to Taslim. Once I get you your slides here, of course, that's yeah, you will need that, obviously. So hopefully I will post the right slides here in a few seconds. There you go. And take it away.
So great. Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Brenda, and thank you all of you for being here. So welcome to Refugee Rights Day, Intercultural Strategies in the EAL Classroom, in which we'll offer a brief overview of intercultural competency, or otherwise known as IC. I'll flip back and forth between the terms. Theory, and build further on some of the tools for building positive relationships and community in diverse contexts offered in the activity package you used this morning. And we'll also look at a few easy strategies to add an intercultural lens to activities that you may already do. So we hope that this webinar helps you to introduce the development of intercultural awareness in your classroom, and that you come away inspired by the important role you play as instructors in raising awareness for the value of diversity and inclusion, as well as community building that learners can use both inside the classroom and outside as well. And we'll also look at how you can learn more about doing this. So, here's a little arrow. So before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge that the land from which we host this webinar is located on unceded Indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish peoples, and this includes the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Stolo, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. So as Nathan and Brenda already pointed out, please join the conversation either on the blog or in the Tutela chat box over here, or on Twitter using hashtag EAL action. I would like to just let you know that the blog will be open for the next few days. So feel free to post your class's creations or writings, and we're intending to choose some to highlight in a coming newsletter article, and would love to have a submission from you. So here we are, the agenda. So what we're going to work through today is we're going to start with a little bit of context. What is IC? Intercultural competency training for language teachers. We're going to look at intentionality and building intercultural competency in the EAL classroom. Why would we bring IC to the classroom? Did I just make that very big? What happened? There we go. And why would we bring IC to the classroom? What is its impact? And some of the challenges. And then we'll kind of move into theory that we need to practice. What do you need to know to bring IC conversations to your classrooms? And finally, we'll just take a look at some very simple strategies to grow IC in the EAL classroom. So those will include awareness raising, noticing, and perspective taking. And I'm going to tie those back to some of the activities you had in the package. I hope that you've had a chance to just have a quick look at those. So I'd like to start by asking you, what is intercultural competency? And if you'd like to just post in the sidebar, just what does that mean to you? It's kind of a big word. Okay, cultural awareness. So I have here a definition that comes from CARF, which is a quality assurance organization for service providers. So this is just one of many definitions, but it's kind of a great one because it's got some very concrete and core ideas included in it. So the first part of it would be attitude, and that means your attitude towards difference. How do you feel about people when they do things differently than you? The next piece is awareness. That is, what is your awareness of your own cultural preferences and tendencies? And then that's kind of coupled with knowledge, which is, what's your knowledge of other people's cultural preferences and tendencies? And the final part is skills. So how do you work with those differences? And this webinar today will really focus on attitude, awareness, and knowledge. Great. So yeah, Sarah put ability to navigate situations involving people from different cultural and language backgrounds. I think that's a great part of the definition. Good. Okay. So MOSAIC has developed a training in response to instructor requests for support in bringing IC to the classroom, and also in working successfully with challenging IC situations. And what that training looks at is self-reflection survey. It uses a self-reflection survey to become aware of what we prefer ourselves, and it does capacity building for managing with difference. It gives cultural knowledge, noticing, perspective taking, provides an opportunity to share experiences from the classroom, and processing and responding to IC challenges, as well as some materials and material development support. And that training is available online, blended, and in a face-to-face model. So Throughout the day, we keep referring to the idea of intentionality. And I'd like to connect intentionality with intercultural competency in the classroom. So what is intentionality? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, my personal favourite, intentionality means it's something done on purpose, something deliberate, and something conscious. So I'd like to ask you, what's the role of bringing intercultural competency into the classroom? Great, cohesion. That's definitely an important reason. Yes, community building and understanding. Super. Good. So, and to help students function, I think that's really important because they're working with difference all the time. But they're not even necessarily aware that people are different to them. Prepare English language learners for full participation in Canadian society. Great. All great reasons. So I want to just share with you the role of intentionality in bringing intercultural competence to the ESL classroom or EAL classroom. Intentionally growing intercultural awareness provides an opportunity for learners and instructors to build trust and foster more open and understanding relationships by being interested in and listening to other people's stories, by building empathy for diverse human experience, by noticing and naming our similarities and differences, and by identifying overarching commonalities such as the desire to belong or feel safe or be accepted. So now I want to ask you, what do you do to intentionally help your students build intercultural awareness in your classroom? Great. Sharing stories, videos and pictures. Yes, ask questions about students' personal experiences. Great. Just framing them in such a way that they remain safe, just being sensitive. Like, I think that's where the teacher comes in, helping to frame things in a way that keeps conversations objective and gentle. Using their names, my goodness me, yes. Great. So you've got lots of great responses there about what you already do to help your students build intercultural awareness in your classrooms. So now I want to ask you, it keeps giving me answers. I have it on an animation, but it's not going that way. So I'm going to click back and I'm going to ask you, why would we bring intercultural competency in the EAL classroom? You may find there's some overlap there. I'm just going to go on to the slide. So, to build ease with diversity, prepare them to live here, great. Promote inclusion, cultivate a sense of psychological safety. Studies show that psychological safety is really important to people's learning. You may know it as affective factors, these things that make people feel safe and secure in themselves, which then enables them to learn much more effectively, raising awareness of different normals and giving strategies to use both in the classroom community and in the greater community. So yeah, I see it keeps coming up here, to prepare them to live here, exactly. Create a classroom culture where questions are welcomed rather than a sign of weakness. Absolutely. And empower our learners. Great. So I want to ask you now, what do you find are some of the challenges to introducing intercultural awareness to the class? Yeah, I'm enjoying the comments too. Yes, strong prejudices about a certain culture, for sure. Anything else challenging about bringing intercultural competency to the classroom? Or conversations about cultural difference? Multiculturalism and new cultures are very different for many students. Yes, many people do come from monocultural places, conflicting values, absolutely. Oh, great. The beginning was stressful. Oh, I'd like to hear more about that. No, they haven't necessarily thought a lot about culture. In fact, it's often a start point for talking about culture that we're not even aware, like a fish in water, we're not even aware that we have these deep cultural ways of being. Great. Yeah. Very different worldviews people sometimes have. Yeah, great. So lots of great responses here. So what I'm going to show you now are some of the challenges as I framed them. So unconscious bias, ethnocentrism, awareness, intercultural sensitivity. That difference can cause anxiety. So these challenges are often more manageable if you have some background IC knowledge. So in this next part, we're going to take a brief look at some intercultural theory. Oh, on the wrong clicker. Thank you. So what differences do you notice come up in your classes? Oh my goodness, some even cried. Yeah, it's big stuff, the cultural stuff, which is why I hope that the webinar will help you to frame your conversations in such a way that you can hold the space and keep it safe for conversations. Yeah, I do take your point. It can be very uncomfortable for teachers being a representative of a culture, which is why I would recommend that you wouldn't set yourself up as the culture, but rather offer your own personal experience. Great. So what differences do you notice coming up in your classes? I just want to give you a chance to just, yeah, they have very different attitudes towards learning, for example. They have very different stories about their journeys. Many want me to make all the decisions. Great. Are there any other kind of specific differences you see coming up in your classes? Different understandings of community, complaining about food and smells. Sometimes gender issues. Yes. So I just wanted to give you a moment. Yes, I did have that feedback too, which is why it's all the more important if students are complaining about refugees. It's just a signal that it's time to open a conversation. But to do that as an instructor, you need to feel like you can hold the space, which means that you need to be able to frame your questions in such a way that you can steer the conversation more towards observations and less towards personal opinion. And you're well within your rights to just say, yeah, I can see how you might think that, but I'd like to focus on this. And sort of move the conversation in a safer direction, just keeping it more objective. Okay, so I wanted to just give you a moment to come up with some of the differences that you'd noticed, because it ties into this next piece, which is the iceberg. And so in here, I'd like you to take a moment with this new framing to notice what the differences were. We had, for example, gender roles. We had, for example, learning styles. We also had food. I know, I love this iceberg too. Yeah. Sarah, you're bringing up a really important point about the LGBTQ, and I think you'd have to take my training to find out more. I actually work with refugee newcomers. I just use the word refugee to give a context to it. But yeah, we do some work with that, in which we talk about their normals, then we talk about what they perceive as Canadian normals, and then we offer some kind of pragmatic conversation, and then we practice that and give a story to show how that might turn up in the real world and how they would manage with that. Okay, so I would like to just
and if are you going to be
can you
busy
hear
that
me?
night?
Because I can hear somebody else.
As of right now, no, it doesn't look.
Thank you. Great. So I don't know if you're familiar with the iceberg, all of you, but this is one way for us to become more aware of the breadth of culture. The top part represents what we see easily, and this is the visible part. The lower part represents what we don't see so easily, and this is the invisible part. It's quite a lot, isn't it? So we live in diverse environments, but we're often not aware of others and their norms. And these many different ways of doing things are often different than our preferences or our own default settings. And these are often connected with our hidden biases. So our reaction to difference will often shape our reaction to others, whether, for example, we include them or not. By exploring our diverse ways of doing things, we have a chance to tell each other about ourselves and learn about others. And this promotes empathy and our ability to navigate difference in and out of the classroom. And since most of us would like to feel that we're accepted, that we're included, and that we belong, tending to these through an intercultural lens plays a vital role in the forming of diverse and inclusive communities. So these aspects of culture that you see in the iceberg, they can all be jump-off points for conversation, starting with the simpler ones and moving into the more complex hidden ones. You can also grade the iceberg into a simpler form for lower levels, perhaps only referring to 3 or 4 relevant ones, for example, body language, gender roles, or learning styles, notions of modesty, addressing dress, or you could just start at a very low level with things like food, just acknowledging what food people eat, what language they speak, what's their favorite festival, and really doing a share, and really in much the same way as you probably already do in your classroom, just giving it an intercultural lens. So being aware of the kinds of differences that might be going on is a great start, but we also need to consider how others, including ourselves, feel about difference. So I'm going to show you now Milton Bennett's developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. which is a continuum describing the increasing perception of complexity of cultural difference. It's a continuum that helps us understand our own comfort with difference. And I'm just going to walk you through the continuum. And as I speak, I'd like you to just note where you might place yourself, because I'm going to ask you to reflect on that in the end. So there's no right or wrong in this continuum. It just really kind of describes the level of comfort. So in defense, we see our culture as the correct culture and feel threatened by difference. Oh, I started with defense, I meant denial. So in denial, we ignore different groups in our environment. Perhaps knowing that they're there, but not perceiving them as relevant to our lives. In defense, we see our culture as the correct culture and feel threatened by difference. In minimization, we see our own culture as universal, and we focus only on our commonalities, minimizing or even avoiding difference. In acceptance, we acknowledge our culture as one of many equally complex worldviews, and we no longer feel threatened by the difference. I'd like to take this opportunity to just highlight that acceptance does not mean agreement. It just means recognizing that as important as your culture is to you, somebody else's culture is to them. And moving from there into adaptation, where we're empathetic, curious, and growing our ability to adapt our behaviors to achieve successful interaction with differences. And finally, to integration. We move easily in and out of different cultural worldviews. I think, once again, it's worth pointing out, integration does not mean integration into the host culture. It means integrating different aspects of culture into ourselves. So we no longer think of the different ways of people doing things. We no longer name them as different, but just kind of recognize them and move between them easily. So I'd like to invite you to reflect on where you would place yourself on that continuum, keeping in mind that there's no right or wrong, just a range of feeling about difference. Yes, Brenda, I'm not sure how that would go down, but it's just one offer of a definition of integration within a cultural context. Many people are quite happy. I can see Sarah's posted adaptation. So, and again, I should have said you aren't obliged to post that. That might be very personal to you. So adaptation would mean that you've landed on the ethno-relative side of the continuum. The denial, defense, and minimization represent an ethnocentric worldview. And the acceptance, adaptation, and integration represent an ethno-relative worldview. So the start point for many of our clients will be denial, defense, or culture shock. So that sort of helps us frame the goal for our materials and how far we want to go in our exploration, how deep we want to go the first, second, or third time round. You kind of, in the same way as PBLA spirals, I would say that intercultural competency also spirals through the levels. So if you introduce it at a literacy or perhaps a link 1 level, link 2 level, learners have a chance to become familiar with that idea of noticing and acknowledging difference and reflecting on themselves and how they do things. So if you notice, for example, that a student experiences other cultures from a denial stage, you might simply raise awareness of the existence of other cultures, just sort of allowing space for saying where people are from, what language they speak, pointing them out on the map, just really highlighting their existence. In defense, you might point out that there are some commonalities, that even though somebody may feel very different from you in their cultural ways and orientations, that there may actually be some things in common. At minimization, you want to highlight the fact that yes, we are all similar, we do have certain similarities, but the differences are also important, and those are okay too. And by the time you reach acceptance, students should see other cultures as equally complex as their own, and whatever threat they felt in the ethnocentric stages should no longer be present, which really paves the way for working with adaptive strategies. So what is our role as teachers? I think we're just looking to help students notice others and become aware of the many different ways that people have of doing and perceiving, and develop a comfort with difference. So with this information in mind, it's now time to look at strategies and build further upon the activities that were in the Refugee Rights Day package that some of you had a chance to work on with your groups, and if not, I hope that you will do in the coming month, and encourage you to do so. So I want to ask you, before I tell you what I think, how can we bring awareness to cultural difference in the classroom? And how can we grow intercultural trust and empathy? Right. That's great to hear that the walk activity was great. Starts with building in community in the classroom. Common ground rules at the outset. We can allow students to have a voice and to question how and why we do things. I really appreciate that, Bonnie, because often as language teachers and kind of gatekeepers to culture in some ways, we can sort of find ourselves telling people as opposed to asking. So the general strategy I use is I ask how students do things or how learners do things. And then I ask how they see Canadians doing things. And then I plug in my own personal experience. And I also let them know that Canadians have very diverse ways of doing things, because we ourselves are diverse, not only in terms of a national culture, but also in terms of a personal culture. Yeah, like that, being open to our own resistance. So going back to the DMIS. Yeah, great. Yeah, sharing your own stories is great. And I think the important thing about, the wonderful thing about sharing your story is you can then invite other people to share their stories, and you can show that that's okay to share those things, but always letting students know that they only need to share as much as they feel comfortable with. Great. So I had, for strategies, raising awareness of newcomer and visitor experience, discovering what we have in common, exploring multiple perspectives, for example, through those stories, and overarching, acknowledging, for example, in today's activities about inclusion, diversity, and community building, acknowledging that overarching desire to feel accepted and get things done. So we may all have different ways of doing things, for example, in the classroom, but the overarching desire might be to learn English. That's just one example. And building group capacity to co-create our understanding of each other and how to work with difference. So to build intercultural awareness and competence, it's important to embed these strategies in what you already do. There was a UBC study done for anti-racism, diversity and intercultural trainings in BC, and they spoke about what they did. And they said that embedding is an essential requirement for success, and that they endeavored to bring a diversity lens to all their curriculum development. And I would encourage you to do the same. There's not necessarily one particular activity, although there are specific activities developed for developing intercultural competence, but just adding that lens of awareness and noticing and honouring difference to build that comfort. So I want to just move on to some of the activities that you may have done today. There was an activity called Move to the Other Side of the Room If. And I wanted to show you how this activity could easily be adapted to explore identity in a more personal way. So what he did was created a list of alternative questions that are really tied into personal identity. So, for example, move to the other side of the room if you're a woman, that's about gender. You finish high school, education, you think of yourself as religious, that would be religion or spiritual beliefs or not. You don't eat meat, that would be maybe your attitude towards animals. You own a car, that may be connected with your economic status. This is your first time living in a different country, that might be your immigration status. That you have a friend from a different country, you like to play video games, you come from a small town, that would be rural urban status. Worked in a store, you're shy. So these are all nice sort of questions based on an identity onion, which gives us some ways that we may self-identify. And I want to just give a little pointer here for anyone who didn't do the activity already. That the idea is that as people move to the other side of the room, they have a moment to notice who they're standing with. And they may find that they have things in common with people that they didn't realize, or they hadn't really thought of as a commonality. Or they may notice that people they thought they had something in common with have very different, are very different than themselves. And so not sort of rushing through the activity, but giving a moment for the group to reflect on where everybody is in the room. The identity onion or the culture onion that I spoke of, this is an example of it. And you can see that this would be kind of the very raw concepts. I think these are equally good to use in classes, and I have used them in classes very successfully. I do a speed dating game with them. So in the speed dating game, everybody gets, you have line A and line B, and there's 2 or 3 minutes to find out as much as you can about your partner before moving on. Or you could do it as a more quiet and reflective activity where you just have students speak to 2 or 3 other members of the class, just to gain a greater awareness of each other. So the idea here is that we may be surprised by our commonalities, raises awareness that we may have more in common than we think. And when we find commonalities, it cultivates bonds, which in turn build greater empathy and community. And by practicing noticing similarities, we can create awareness and we can help people develop along the DMIS. I see somebody saw the video, or if you haven't seen the video, I see Sarah says it reminds me of the powerful Danish or Dutch video. That's exactly the video link that I've given you. And it could be really fun to do that move across the room activity and then show the learners the video, because the video actually addresses even braver topics. For example, move to the other side of the room if you're bisexual, and only one person moves to the other side of the room. So it can also, the video can also be a jump off point for a conversation about LGBTQ, which I saw there was some curiosity about earlier in the postings. Great. Yeah. So moving on to the next slide. Some of you may have done activities connected with the exploring diversity and inclusion, and perhaps you used the mind maps or the slips of paper where students wrote down what these concepts meant to them. And this type of activity really helps learners notice how different people see the same ideas. So some of their responses would have been similar and some not, but we have a shared overarching goal, and we give space to reflect on this. So this helps pull the group back together in safety. So for example, in today's activity, you may have asked, what does inclusion mean for you? So in this chart, you can see, oh yeah, so what does inclusion mean for you? And then you may talk about what that means. I think I'm being confusing here. So what does that mean for me? And then what does that mean for you? And then what do I think inclusion means in Canadian culture? And then after that, you would pull it all together with your own personal perspective as an instructor, how you see inclusion, letting learners know that there will be many diverse ways of perceiving that. And that the commonality here is that we would all want to feel included. So going back to that original definition of intercultural competency, this kind of activity would help us to raise awareness of ourselves and knowledge of others, and it would also help to cultivate an attitude component of the definition, that original definition I gave you, with attitude, self-awareness, and knowledge of others. And seeing and understanding how peers perceive the same concept or idea, and honoring these by discussing the similarities and differences, helps cultivate empathy within the group. And it builds our ability to see different perspective points. So we had, for example, in example 2, you might, for example, come up with, who do you talk to in class? If you see, for example, that could be something interesting to talk about. And then the teacher, men, women, people from different countries, maybe nobody. This can really give people an opportunity to describe their preferences and learn about others and their normals, and then give you a chance from that space of having acknowledged other people's culture and their ways of doing things, acknowledging their way first and then adding in your perspective. Again, example 3, who do you greet in class and how do you greet? So this kind of activity can be really great throughout the levels, and you could increase the complexity of the questions. But especially at low levels, I'd just like to point out that when we do IC, it's not really an IC lesson. It's more about finding perspective points. And by practicing perspective taking and exploring perspective points, we can again create awareness and movement along the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity. So you can do the same kind of activity using this simple chart and exploring differences or challenges that you see coming up. Or alternately, you can draw on that iceberg for ideas of the kind of questions you'd like to explore. So Sorry. So although there's no right or wrong in this activity, there is an important piece in which the teacher, speaking from their own experience, can share their normal. And I think that's a really important thing to consider, because you're going from an ethnocentric perspective, this is my way, this is my culture's way, which is really a bit of a stereotype. It's kind of saying we're all the same when actually Canadians are very diverse, to an ethno-relative way, where you just sort of accepting that people have many different ways of doing things, even within Canada. So this could be an experience, but this could be a way of sharing normals, and from there you could lead into a pragmatics lesson on how to, for example, greet, or how to make small talk, what would be appropriate, how to open a conversation, or you could do a reading, for example, just exploring Canadian culture further, so that you can give that very important component of cultural knowledge about Canada. So what can you do to increase IC in the classroom? You can do awareness raising activities. You would tend to repatterning how people perceive each other, just by regularly checking in about cultural difference and ways of doing things and preferences, and maybe reasons why. And you could use strategies like creating opportunities for safe contact and sharing, making space for the group to ask questions, exploring multiple perspectives, and using what we already have available to us in the form of texts, visual surveys, comparisons, and contrasts. So these are just a few ideas. However, like I said, many of the traditional materials are perfect for IC activities. It's really about the lens you see it through, and seizing that opportunity that the materials provide to create a safe, structured space to ask questions, learn more about each other, open the door to conversation, empathy, acknowledge difference, find overarching commonalities, and to bond the group in ways that they may not have found alone. So I think that really brings us to questions and answers.
Yes, thank you very much, Taslim. There's a lot of good stuff there, a lot of meat to chew on there for a while. It's good. It's really good. It's hard to pack all of that in. We do want to leave some time here for questions and answers. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat box, and we'll try and catch up with them. I noticed that Sarah was just asking about repatterning, and just maybe if you can just quickly go over that again, and just give us a quick overview of that again.
So repatterning, I just kind of touched on it. Repatterning is connected with how our brain interprets different information. So we have certain knowledge, and those would be how we're patterned, so how we like to do things, what seems the correct way of doing things for us. Those would also tie into the idea of a hidden bias. And by becoming aware of what our patterns of thought are, and what our preferences are, and maybe what our hidden biases are, we have a chance to tend to those and sort of have that kind of moment where we go, oh, yeah, that did seem normal and correct to me, but now I can also see how this other person does things is normal and correct to them. And then maybe I can start to adjust my behaviors so that I can work successfully with that person.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions that are out there? I'm sure there's some of you are still trying to figure all of this out and process all of this. But
so
lots
yeah,
and lots of comments. But
yeah, one of my students shared she would not accept a gay son when we were discussing about bullying. This broke my heart, and I did not know what to say. What should I have said? Well, I think this is kind of, you're raising such an important point. I do hope I'm saying your name correctly, Cynthia. What you're doing is creating a safe space, and what they teach at Norquest College is a skill set cycle which begins with suspending judgment. So you hear something which is quite shocking for yourself because it conflicts with your own feelings about sexuality in this situation. So the next part of the skill set cycle is where you would say, okay, so what happened? She said that she wouldn't be able to accept a gay son. And I felt sad about this. And then the next bit would be to look at, okay, so how did she feel about that situation and how did I feel about that situation? So she felt that would be very worrying to her and not acceptable. And you felt that would be very sad, and you couldn't understand why she would say something like that. So then if you look deeper back into the iceberg, you'll remember that there is a one little part which talks about gender, and I'm not sure if they use the word well, under, for example, attitudes or values would be a nice place to put it. So you have very different values and attitudes about sexuality and what's acceptable and not acceptable. So then you would then look for from there, okay, what's the way forward? So at that point, it really wouldn't be a question of saying whether you thought that was right or wrong. It would simply be a point of raising, yes, that must be something quite different for you. But there are people who are gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender or whatever it is. And you may even add in an awareness point that would be okay in Canada and tie it into the law. I find I often tie some of the deeper cultural differences back into the law, but I also let people know that, and that might seem strange to you, and that might take you a while to sort of get your head round, but that's okay. And you may never get your head around it, but that's okay. This is the start point of the conversation.
Great. Yeah, I think that's important. We can't solve it all at once. It is a process. It's time that takes, and you're just starting the process. So good point there, Taslim.
That's right. You really can't take people from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. And yeah, you can see I don't have a very fast car, but it's a long journey of providing repeated opportunities and not taking it personally. If people think differently, they think differently. Yeah. But tying it back to the law and cultural acceptability is okay, but it would be done more as offering that information as opposed to informing or letting people know what you thought was right or wrong.
We do have a couple more questions here. Brenda wrote, does this fit into the realm of perspective taking?
Definitely. That's exactly what it would be at a more complex level. So at a very low, at a sort of introductory level of bringing IC into your classroom, practicing seeing perspective points, noticing differences, becoming aware that they exist is kind of the first stage. But as you move along with your group, you will actually be able to do this perspective taking. And I find that the perspective taking is the one that needs the most attention for most of us, because as I do the trainings, what I notice is people are usually very able to articulate their own perspective, their own feelings, their own values, but it's a real practice to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and try to work out what's going on for them, what seems right for them, and the whole time suspending judgment and accepting that people have their own equally complex worldviews, which they are as attached to as we are to our own.
Great. Another question for you from Sarah.
Sure.
She says, what is your take on how EAL instructors can approach examining our own biases? And she says, and I'd add positions of privilege and power as well as EAL instructors.
So thanks, Sarah, for your very insightful question. The MOSAIC training actually does work with power and privilege in the classroom, and the power and privilege that we as instructors have. I find it's a very sensitive conversation for instructors. So we introduce the idea of what is power and privilege. We invite instructors to share how they may see that coming up in their classrooms. And then we offer what the result is. And for example, in settlement contexts, that can mean that when people need help, they may not come to you because they're afraid of your judgments. But that is such a difficult and delicate conversation with instructors, because again, you can't go 0 to 60. Nobody likes to be confronted with their own biases, or well, not nobody. I think I'd say it's a 50-50 split. I'd say some are very, very open to that conversation and are determined to work with it. And for some, just raising that awareness is the beginning of the conversation. So take the training.
Great. Actually, we kind of run out of time here, but we do want to just cover a few more things here as well.
Sure.
The thing that I noticed, I'm just grabbing your slides here for a second because I know you have a slide here. But there's first off your contact information. So again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
There's lots and lots of great information. So make sure people, if you don't have this information, take a quick screenshot, grab this. You'll want this. But we also do want to do one more little comment, and that is we do have the BC TEAL conference coming up. And as Shauna just mentioned in the chat box, we also have the Pre-Conference Institute. And the Pre-Conference Institute happens on the Thursday before the conference. And in that, we have Pre-Conference Institute on Intercultural Competencies, led by, I hope I got this name right, Yuji Abe. I hope I got that name right, from Norquest. And so please check that out. You can go to the bcteal.org website and go on events, and you'll find the conference there. The deadline, the early bird deadline for registration, you want to save some money here, so you want to get on early, is April 8th. So that's coming up very shortly. You only have about 4 more days to kind of catch up on that. This is our 50th anniversary of BC TEAL, yay! And so we've gone all out and had a massive carnival and conference, and we have speakers Jill Hadfield, Penny Andy Curtis, and so many more. Those are the main speakers, but if you could take a look through the schedule, and the schedule is posted now of all of the speakers, including, I think, Taslim, you're also presenting, right? Am I correct? Yeah. And me and a bunch of others. There's so many people presenting, and I want to go to all of the sessions, but I can't, so I'll have to choose, I guess. So anyway, please make sure that you check that out. The schedule is posted and everything is there. So thank you again, Taslim. This is wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your fabulous participation. That's great.
And thank you to everybody for coming on an evening and joining us. We really appreciate this on Refugee Rights Day. And we hope that we can provide more webinars like this in very short order, where we can have you participate directly as well. So please, if you have some ideas, let us know what webinars that you'd be interested in as well. So thank you again, everybody.